Welcome to Forbes Newsroom. Joining me now is Robert Cahaley, Senior Strategist and Pollster at the Trafalgar Group. Robert, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's an honor to be here.
I'm really looking forward to speaking with you, especially as the midterms approach. So, you famously were the only pollster back in 2016 to accurately predict both Michigan as well as Pennsylvania for President Trump. And then you did it again in 2021 in the gubernatorial races for Pennsylvania as well as Virginia. So, why do you think you're one of the only people who called these races accurately?
Well, we have our polling we use a completely different model than most of the others, and I call it common sense. I make fun of these guys a lot of time. I call most of these other pollsters the Pony Express pollsters because I don't feel like they've really caught up to anything modern, and they haven't really adjusted their system. And I think it's why they get so many things wrong. One of the main things is their questionnaires are so long. I think really, if you're trying to get really deep in an issue and you're trying to really come up with some strong patterns, that makes plenty of sense. But when you're trying to measure an actual political race, you are losing average people. They wonder why their polls skew toward college educated people. And it's mainly because when you look at the kind of people who are going to sit down and answer 20 or 30 questions, 40, there's even a couple of them that are 100 questions. You lose average people. You get people who care too much about politics, or worse yet, people who are bored.
Got it. And is this one of the reasons that you said on Fox News recently, you think in these midterms, people are underestimating the GOP turnout here?
Well, that's a little bit different because what that is Republican voters who are hesitant to even participate. What we saw in 2016 was Republicans who were shy to admit they were voting for Trump. And we came up with some vehicles to kind of get around that. One we famously used was the neighbor device, which is simply a projection device. So you say, okay, I understand you're for Hillary. How would you say most of your neighbors are voting? And it let people who are for Trump say, oh yeah, well, they're for Trump, without feeling like the person on the other end of the line is judging them. And that's called the social desirability bias. And some refer to it as the Bradley effect, referring to a race back in the 80s with a guy named Duke Majan and former mayor Tom Bradley of Los Angeles, where the people overestimated their support for Bradley, who was black, because they didn't want to be judged by the callers. And it ended up that the support for Bradley wasn't near what people had thought it was based on this effect. And so we felt like that was going on in 2016, and we were able to identify it and kind of get past that and make some better projections. In 2020, it was not so much that, it was that Republicans who were for Trump were hesitant to participate in polls, but you had to work extra hard to get to them. It was like 5-1 were they less likely. So you had to really work hard because the type of Republicans who did want to take polls in 2020 were Republicans who did not like Trump. They couldn't wait to get a phone call. And so many polls overestimated them because they were so easy to poll. In 2022, I think what we're finding is people are so nervous. Biden did this speech and kind of declared the MAGA supporters enemies of the state. And, they're seeing stuff on TV. And granted, some of it's a little overblown, but they're seeing things about the FBI looking at Facebook. They're hearing stories of people having their doors broken down because they express political opinions. Even stories about gun purchases being tracked by the banks because of government pressure. Of course, they wonder about the integrity of polling data, and they're wondering, hey, am I going to be put on a list if I participate? So what I've come up with and seen through some of our surveys and some of the feedback we've gotten is that they're now, I would call them not shy, but I would call them submerged voters. They're not putting stickers on their car anymore. They're not putting signs in their yard. They're not posting on social media, and they're not taking polls. So I would say all polls, including ours, will underestimate the Republican strength and turnout this year.
Wow, that's really interesting. And are you seeing any parallels here from the 2016 election to the 2022 midterms?
I think it's just more overstated because in 2022, Trump supporters were called smelly Walmart shoppers, and they were called deplorables. But no one was suggesting that somehow they were domestic terrorist for supporting a Republican. And there is a lot of that. And with all this talk about some of the it's happening with Biden, and this appears to be like a kind of rounding up or cracking down on people. And again, this may be overblown, but what really matters is not what's actually going on; it's what's in the mind of the voter. That's all that this ever mattered. And if a voter feels like they don't want to be targeted, and they don't want to be ridiculed, and they don't want to be on a quote unquote list, then their hesitancy to participate in a poll makes sense. And I think that there's just a lot of these guys, like I said, they're submerged, they're underwater. You're not going to hear from them until election day, and no one's going to know. You could be living beside a person who is absolutely going to vote a straight Republican ticket, and you'd never know it.
And you said that you've seen these shy or submerged Republicans since 2016. Historically, since you've been a pollster, is that since 2016 that GOP voters have been more shy to say that they're a GOP voter, or has that been a trend beforehand?
Well, like I said, there have been races in the past, like the Bradley race back in the day, and there have been other races where the candidate was somewhat controversial, and you had this shot voter effect, but it was more candidate based. What we've seen since 2016, it was still kind of based on Trump or the opposing candidate. In 2018, for example, we only saw it in one place, Florida, and we saw it in the governor's race. You had DeSantis running against Gillum, and then in the Senate race, you had Nelson running, incumbent Nelson running against Scott. Now, in the Nelson Scott race, whatever people said they were for is who they were for. In the DeSantis Gillum race, though, there was a 2 or 3 point advantage for Gillum of people who did not intend to vote for him, who, for whatever reason, didn't want to be judged for not being for him. And so his support was overblown. So we were the only ones to predict that he would lose, and that race would be a wider margin than the Senate race, which it was. Now, again, that was still candidate driven. In 2020, it was more of kind of Republicans who supported Trump. In 2022, it's just Republicans in general. The idea that if you're a Republican, if you're a quote unquote MAGA Republican, which is, most Republicans would say they support the agenda of America first. I mean, it's a very small segment who don't. Even if they don't particularly like Trump, they like that agenda. And so that's a bigger swath of people than just tied to a candidate. So I would say that in the past, it was about a particular candidate. In the years when it happens, this time it is more about people in an entire segment of a party.
Great. I do want to break down some key midterm races with you. Your polling is fascinating, so let's get right to it. Starting with the Washington Senate race. The Washington Senate has been blue for over 2 decades, but according to your polling, Tiffany Smiley, the Republican, is within the margin of error to incumbent Senator Patty Murray. Why do you think you're predicting that this race is closer than other pollsters are?
Well, one, our methodology is about getting average people. Every single other poll I've seen on this race has college educated participation way high, has people with high political efficacy making up the vast majority of the people polled. And some of them are doing crazy stuff like just polling all registered voters. When you see a poll of all registered voters and not likely voters, it's a pollster saying, I give up. I have no idea who's going to show up, so I'm going to do the minimum. Well, that's not good enough. Second, what our system, because we give people lots of ways to participate, we get a larger participation from a lot of different groups. You actually see today polls from major media outlets. There's one in particular. All they do is live calls. Now, my question is very simple. If you know someone who's a millennial or Gen Z, how many of those folks do you know that are normal that answer the phone live from a number they don't recognize and they'd be willing to answer 30 questions? I can't think of one normal Gen Z or millennial who'll do that. So who are they polling? I don't understand. We put together polls, whether it's email, text, online, live call. We give people lots of different ways to participate. We give them, with a text or an email, we say you have 2 days. Give them a time and let them take it at their own pace when they want to. It's kind of like a smart bank. It gives you a way to go in and make a deposit if you're old fashioned, or you can mail it in, or you can drop it off, or you can go to ATM, or you can take a picture of it on your phone, depending on your level of technology and your willingness to handle things on your own. Well, that's banks that have learned to do that are the banks that are surviving. And pollsters who learned to treat people differently based on their willingness to participate are going to prosper. And so that's kind of our main way we do it differently. But in this race, we see it very close. Back in 2010, she came within 4 points of losing, and now Murray's incumbent two more terms. That's a lot more if she's been there a while. And you see Smiley is an exceptional candidate. Washington State, Seattle has been on the front lines of a lot of nonsense. What's interesting is of the 4.4% are undecided, 72 say disapprove or strongly disapprove of the job Biden is doing. So 72% of the undecideds don't think Biden is doing very well. That doesn't bode well for how the undecideds could break. So we think this one's going to be one to keep an eye on. That's our second poll showing it close.
Yeah, and I'm definitely going to keep an eye on this one. And I know Patty Murray has been vocal in decrying the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. Do you think that the issue of abortion and her Let Doctors Provide Reproductive Health Care Act will help propel her forward more? Or is abortion an issue that Washington State voters don't care as much about?
Well, you take and look at the acts that have been proposed. In the Congress by both the Democrats and Republicans. I know Senator Graham on the Republican side has sponsored one. One allows abortion in the third trimester. One allows for partial birth abortion. One allows lots of late term abortions. And one, is at 15 weeks. Now, when you get to 15, 16 weeks and exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother, you're now at the 70% of America on that side. So the extreme position on abortion is the position that Patty Murray is outlining, and that is not as popular. Yes, there are absolutely people around the country who are upset by the ruling and are concerned by states that are trying to limit it to no exceptions or just the life of the mother, and not even heartbeat, not even 15 weeks. But that on that extreme, you end up having a Democrat strength. On the extreme of third trimester and late term abortion, you end up with the Democrats being on the extreme side. And so in her particular case, I think she's on the wrong side of that. And that she thinks it's going to be helpful to her, but I really don't know that it is. The other thing is this is the Democratic Party, going back to the days of Bill Clinton, believed that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. That was their framing. Well, when you're the party advocating third trimester and abortion on demand, you're no longer holding that position. And the people it is costing them in the African American community, the Hispanic community, and the Asian community by that extreme position on abortion are going to probably outnumber the people that they're picking up and motivating.
I do want to talk to you about abortion because you did have a poll on it. Your polling found that people more align with Lindsey Graham's 15-week federal abortion ban opposed to a federal law that says women have a right to abortion at any stage of pregnancy. So do you think that because more people that you found align more with Lindsey Graham's bill there, do you think that tells us that there could be more common ground on abortion politically?
Oh, here's the thing. There's no question when you go through the entire thing and you outline all of it, the people who believe in third trimester, late term abortion, abortion on demand, and partial birth abortion are 11% of the population. 89% of the population opposes that. So when the Democrats put their bill in front of the Congress that included all that, they were on the wrong side of 89% of the population. And it's just a sliding scale. You go from a very small set of the population says get rid of abortion completely, and then a little bit bigger says life of the mother, and a little bit bigger says rape, incest, life of the mother, and a little bit bigger says heartbeat, and a little bit bigger says 15 weeks, and it works that way. And so it depends on where you're arguing the line is. But abortion without any restriction is, again, only supported by 11% of the population.
And I do want to get to all these issues and messaging in a little bit, but before we get there, I do want to ask you about some races in New York that I found interesting. So, another race or races that people don't think that there's going to be an upset in is the New York AG race and the governor's race. So Letitia James, according to your poll, is in the margin of error, but you currently have her losing to Republican Michael Henry for Attorney General. But that poll was released before Letitia James announced her lawsuit against former President Trump. Do you see that announcement of the lawsuit swinging the pendulum here at all anyway?
Well, we're going to go back and do another New York poll, but most people in New York who knew who Letitia James was knew that she was on a crusade against Trump.
This was a campaign promise.
But here's what they do know also. She's not on a crusade against crime. She's not fixated on making sure that you don't get mugged in the street, that she's not on a crusade to make sure that when someone gets arrested for a crime, they stay in jail, maybe even just spend the night. She's not on a crusade to make sure people get prosecuted fully, and she's not on a crusade to make sure that people, when they go to jail, serve out their full sentence. And when you become the chief law enforcement officer of the state and crime is out of control in that state, guess what? You're going to get a little bit of the blame. And the governor's getting some of it too. And New York is one of the few states where the number one issue is not the economy, it is crime.
And is that why some Democratic groups are backing Lee Zeldin instead of Kathy Hochul? I know that you have Kathy Hochul winning.
Absolutely. It is when we see people whose entire life has been Democrat Party their whole life in New York City, and they say crime is their number one issue, and we ask them what your second issue, they say crime again, even though that's not even the way they're supposed to answer it, and they say Lee Zeldin, that tells you something. They don't like Republicans, but they are done with crime, and they are done with Hochul, and they are ready for a change. And so I'm not, again, saying that I think Zeldin is going to win that race, but I think that is a race that is worth watching because crime has got a lot of people who were very comfortable in their support for Democrats in the past, questioning that. And even look at the New York mayor. When Adams ran, he ran as the police guy who was going to crack down on crime. And so people are surprised now that he didn't turn out to be quite as strong in crime as they thought he was going to be. But he won because of crime.
So you're saying that crime is the possibility. Even some Democrat voters might vote, hey, I'm going to vote for Hochul, but my vote for AG could go to Michael Henry?
I think you're going to see more an alignment of people who are voting for Hochul and, voting for Zeldin and Republican for AG. I don't think you're going to see a lot of people who are going to vote for Hochul and then vote Republican for AG because they pretty much blame both of them for crime. So I think it'll be much more aligned. But I think these are both going to be competitive races.
Moving on to races in Pennsylvania, my home state, so I'm watching those closely. According to your polls, both the Pennsylvania governor's race as well as the Senate race are very close, and the Republican candidates are in the margin of error here. So what issues are you seeing that are resonating with PA voters?
Well, we're going to go back in the field again soon, but what we saw is the economy. People are very frustrated about the economy. They are very frustrated about basically all things Biden administration. People in Pennsylvania have lost people close to them based on fentanyl that's coming across the southern border. So they're worried about the border. People in Pennsylvania are worried about the cost of groceries. They're worried about the cost of all energy completely across the board. They're worried about their energy-related jobs because he had a president who said he's against fracking. It's costing Pennsylvania jobs. You have a U.S. Senate nominee who's against it, and they are also very worried about crime, and so they're just completely out of line with where the people are. I mean, what we have now in most states is a rejection. I mean, you just look at Biden's approval. They're rejecting Biden, and anybody. I mean, when you cut through all the nonsense of an election year, and there's a lot of nonsense, and we all know this, when you're electing a U.S. Senate candidate, you're electing somebody to press a blue button that says, keep doing what you're doing, keep rolling with your Biden agenda, keep passing what you're passing, or a big red button that says stop and stop this agenda. And when it's all said and done, that's what it's going to come down to. And so when all the confusion is passed, that's what people are voting on. And Biden, I always say that running with Biden is like having a house full of termites. Everything may look fine on the outside. Nobody's talking about it, but before everything's said and done, it's going to be the only thing that matters. And I think that is going to be the case in these races with Biden as as kind of the top of the ticket. He might not be running this year, but he is clearly almost every Democrat's running mate, whether they like it or not. And I think that for a while, people weren't talking about Fetterman. Just had a good taste. He was in the hospital, he was recovering, but now that he's out, people are talking about him, and so they kind of laid off of Fetterman, but nobody laid off of Oz. Now both of them are kind of getting it full barrel, and when they both get it full barrel and the records come out, there's certainly a lot of exposure there. And the governor's race, they got two tools. If you believe that attending the rally on January 6th, not going to the Capitol, make you ineligible to be governor. If you believe questioning the 2020 election in Pennsylvania specifically make you ineligible to be governor, then you know what? There's no chance he's not, Mastriano's not going to get elected governor. But we don't think either one of those is disqualifying based on the numbers we're seeing.
So you're not seeing voters disqualify that he is a further right candidate than we're seeing Dr. Oz. But your polling does say that as of now, I know you're going to go back in Pennsylvania, that the Democrats, both Democratic candidates, Josh Shapiro and John Fetterman, are polling slightly ahead. So what in their messaging is working?
Well, I think they just started ahead to begin with. I mean, first of all, do you remember the really nasty primary where Shapiro won and the really nasty primary where Fetterman won? You don't, because it didn't happen. When people go through nasty primaries, you have Republicans at the end who are mad. I mean, you look at how close Oz's primary was. You look at how close Mastriano's primary was. When Republicans don't win, they get angry and they're going to take their football home and not play anymore. And it takes a while for them to kind of get back on board. But I said this at the time. You might be mad that Oz won. You might say, I really want a McCormick. McCormick's a great guy, and McCormick is a great guy. But in the end, you're not voting for Fetterman. I don't care what you say, but the people who voted for McCormick will not be voting for Fetterman because they were voting for a conservative. And so it's not a matter of what in their messaging is working. It's a matter of they're not falling, they're still falling slowly from where they started. Now, the messaging, the only thing that I see the Democrats working is the idea that the quote unquote Inflation Reduction Act, what it did for some of the pricing for senior citizens on some of the prescription drugs, that's the place that they're having the most success. We see some success among those seniors who really don't, the argument has not been made carefully enough. I've always made the point that Republicans tend to assume people understand that big spending leads to inflation, but I don't know that they do. And I've seen no evidence that people naturally understand that. I think that has to be explained, and I don't think it's been explained. People have assumed people understand it. But what is an emerging issue in Pennsylvania is crime. And I will tell you, I think that those teenagers rushing in and tearing through that Wawa is going to be a defining moment in the Pennsylvania race. And it has put this idea of out of control crime on the front burner. And I think just as the student loan thing started to shift things a lot against Democrats, I think in Pennsylvania, what happened to that Wawa is going to be a demarcation point that is not going to bode well.
So the picture you're painting of PA is that while Fetterman and Shapiro are ahead, you think, from what I'm hearing, is that Dr. Oz as well as Doug Mastriano are going to pull through. Do you think that Pennsylvania will be red come Election Day in November?
I think it's going to be tight.
It's going to be tight.
And in Pennsylvania, when things are tight, you don't know what's going to happen. But I think it is distinctly possible I mean, people say what's going to happen. November's a long way away, and we've seen a lot of things come in the middle of an election that can change things on a dime. I mean, you look at the impact the Hunter Biden laptop would have made had it been known. You look at the impact that the fact that there was going to be a vaccine for COVID had it come out before the election, the impact it would have made. There are all kind of things that did have impact. That Comey and Hillary Clinton had a big impact. There are things that will happen that can change it. But I would tell you, if that election was in 2 weeks, I'd put my money on Oz and Shapiro winning. I mean, Oz and Mastriano winning. But a lot can happen. So you want to know how it's going to look on election day? Ask me closer to election day. But
Well,
right now, I'd say I think if it was next couple of weeks, I'd count on the Republicans to pull through.
I definitely would want to talk to you even closer to Election Day. But now moving on to Nevada. So we're seeing that Adam Laxalt, the Republican there, is polling ahead of incumbent Democrat Catherine Cortez Masto. So what issues are really resonating with voters in Nevada?
Border. The border is a very big issue in Nevada, and frankly, it's just back to Biden. Almost every one of these Democrat incumbents is 90% or more of the time vote with Biden. This is a wholesale rejection of the Biden agenda. This is a wholesale rejection of 85,000 new IRS agents. It is a rejection of paying, if working class people paying off student loans for upper middle class people. It is a rejection of open borders. It is a rejection of a failed policy regarding energy. It is a rejection of how the military is being dealt with. I mean, it's a wholesale rejection. And when you're that tied to Biden, it's a problem. I mean, there's only one U.S. senator, and she's not up this time, that I don't think would be spending her whole day answering questions about Biden, and that's Kirsten Sinema. But the rest of them have, gotten in bed with the Biden agenda, and they're going to pay the price for it because it's a very unpopular agenda.
I want to talk about a poll you actually released yesterday, and that was the Colorado Michael Bennet. And you have Michael Bennet ahead there. Michael Bennet distanced himself from President Biden. Do you think that that's why he's polling ahead there?
I do. And this was the second poll we've done. And in both races, both the Senate and the governor's race, the Democrats had gained some ground since the last time. I don't know much about this O'Day person, but what I did know is that there are some Republicans who are very, very anti-Biden and actually have positive feelings about President Trump, who are not for O'Day. I don't really know what that's about, but there's something about O'Day that has kept Republicans from consolidating around him. And for whatever reason that is, I think I think that one is not coming together well for the Republicans.
And we're talking about this rejection of President Biden. Former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said that if the midterms are going to be a referendum on President Biden, Democrats are going to lose. Do you agree?
I agree with what she said, except for the word if, because the midterms are a referendum on President Biden. And it is a problem. And, that's one she didn't have to circle back on. She could tell you that one straight up.
I do want to talk about that in a second, but I do want to get to a few more races first while I have you. So Arizona is also another interesting one, the governor's race there. So Kari Lake is a right-wing firebrand candidate there for governor. And how is she currently polling ahead in a historically purple Arizona?
Well, let's remember what else Kari Lake is. Kari Lake is a local TV personality that have literally been in people's living rooms for over 20 years. Now, if most people who've ever lived in and kind of grew up in the same media market, there was always those folks who came and went, and they went from one station to the next. They were always there temporarily. And most places, there's that one or two anchors that kind of stayed in the community. Maybe they decided that they liked where they lived and they didn't want to kind of move up the ladder to the next city. And they become a part of your family, and you get to know that person. You get to trust that person. Well, understand that Arizona is not a place with like 5 huge TV markets. It's a place with one big TV market. And in that one big market, Carrie Lake has been in everybody's living rooms on local news, which is more trusted today than national or cable, for over 25 years. That is a hard bond to break. And there are people who are firebrand Democrats who just like her. And her personal magnetism and her personal connection is why she's doing so well. I mean, it's not rocket science. I mean, she's just literally been around, and a lot of people like her, even people who don't understand her politics. They have to be educated on her politics. They just liked her already. And I think the best thing that Masters has going is that he's on a ticket with Carrie Lake.
So Mark Kelly is currently polling slightly ahead of Blake Masters, not by much, but slightly. Do you see a midterm election where people are voting for Carrie Lake and Mark Kelly and splitting the ticket there?
It's possible, because what we saw in 2020, again, remember this was a special in 2020, and what we saw in that election was there was a segment of about 4% of people who voted for Trump and Kelly. So there were some split tickets, but I think they assumed that Kelly would be kind of a little more of a maverick, for lack of a better term, who wouldn't, he campaigned like he wasn't going to be just kind of, towing the party line.
Like John McCain-esque, but Democrat?
Exactly, because what Arizona's always kind of gravitated toward people who kind of push back on their party.
Kirsten Sinema.
Exactly. The worst thing that Kelly has going is there's another senator in his state who is demonstrating what Kelly should be, and that's Sinema. And so she's out there saying, demonstrating. I mean, she's not saying anything against Kelly, but what she's doing is basically the poster child of what people want, what they thought they were getting with Kelly, and instead they're getting a Biden rubber stamp, and they're frustrated by this.
And I do want to move on to Wisconsin, another fascinating race. So Senator Ron Johnson has pulled ahead in September after being behind Mandela Barnes in August. So in 2016, as you know, he had a surprise comeback in his grudge rematch with Russ Feingold. So are we going to see him, do you think, come election day, become a 3-term senator?
That one started really, really rough. We had him down in the very beginning, a lot lower than you would want to see an incumbent for either party. When you see an incumbent that low, you got trouble. But I think that what has happened is, just as with Pennsylvania, Barnes's softness on crime is absolutely devastating. And you got to think about where we're talking about. When you're talking about Wisconsin, you're talking about a place that was dealing with Kenosha, a place that dealt with the Rittenhouse trial, a place that had, a hate crime of somebody taking a car and jamming into a Christmas parade. They've seen some crime. They've seen some crime on a level that most states aren't comfortable with. And when they see, that they've got a potential in Mandela Barnes of another kind of let everybody out of jail and everybody hold hands and it'll be fine. That is not what Wisconsin thinks is going to solve their problems. So I think the more people learn about Barnes, and the more, frankly, that the senator talks a little bit less about Hunter's laptop and a little more about Wisconsin, which he's doing a pretty good job of now, the better the senator's going to do.
That's an interesting point. And so Tony Evers and Tim Michels are currently in a razor-thin Wisconsin governor's race here. Do you think that this is going to be an instance, again, of where someone could vote for Johnson and vote for Evers, or vice versa? Or do you think that they'll split the ticket, or is someone going to ride someone's coattails here?
I think that, one, Evers is not near as unpopular. First of all, Evers' record is different than Barnes. He hasn't said some of the outlandish things that Barnes has said. But at the same time, there are lots of problems, and all the things I just went through happened when this guy was governor, and he didn't do much about it. He could have invited the National Guard when it was offered to him. He didn't take it. I think that you'll see Michels do well on his own. But yes, right now, even in the last poll we did, there was a very small, and I mean a sliver, but there were people who were absolutely voting for the incumbent Ron Johnson and voting for Evers. But I think in the end, you'll see a little less of that. And what we see in those races, both of them, is the undecideds very anti-Biden.
Robert, a huge theme of our conversation today has been crime and how it's resonating with voters here. You did a poll on safety in America, and a question that you asked likely voters was, do you feel as safe in America today as you did 2 years ago? So 47.8% of Democrats answered yes, and 86.8% of Republicans answered no. So why is there such a disconnect here between Democrats and Republicans?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that people in this day and age are answering questions through a partisan perspective. You know, when your party's in charge and you're a Democrat, you might not feel so safe, but my gosh, you don't want to tell everybody that. And so I think a lot of the Democrats that are answering that poll are probably not being completely straightforward. But the fact is, the majority of people in America, and you saw how the independents much more aligned with Republicans on that. The majority do not feel as safe, and in reality, no one would argue, not rationally, that it is not that it is safer today than it was a couple of years ago, because there's just no one's going to argue that. But now there's going to be a lot of debate about what the blame is for that. And I think that a lot of Democrats answering that poll are anticipating the blame for that. But I think that what you're going to find is that people have seen what's going on, and from whether it was defund the police or whether it was just the way the police have kind of backed off, because of all the attention and lawsuits and the feeling that so many of the public have been demonizing them. And, it's a tough job. There's no question. It's a tough job being a policeman. And when a policeman does something that's wrong, and certainly something on purpose is wrong, no one has any time for that, and no one wants to tolerate that. But right now, some police are just being a little hesitant, and when you have a job like that, a little bit of hesitation, people get killed when they do that. When police hesitate to do their job in Texas, children died. So I mean, there is this feeling that some of the attacks on the police have led to some of that hesitation, and so there's a real feeling that this has been brought about, that this is artificial. And certainly with these quote unquote reforms of cashless bail, have had a tremendous impact. And, a message of arrest people who have broken the law, prosecute the ones that are guilty, convict the ones that are guilty, put them in jail and keep them in jail. That does not seem controversial to most people. And yet a lot of people in the Democratic Party think that's a controversial thing to say.
Republicans have been united in their messaging of blaming President Biden and Democratic lawmakers for things like crime, like we were talking about, inflation, and the border. And Democrats have been campaigning on a different message of women's rights, as well as Congress's legislative successes, and a fight against what they describe as extreme MAGA lawmakers. What do you see that is resonating more with voters? The issue of crime?
Well, don't forget climate change, which doesn't actually make the top 5 in any poll when people are talking about the things that they're voting on, but yet it's a fundamental basis of the Democrat Party's platform. And what they've been focusing on. No, I think that's exactly right, is what you see, and this is what we're getting all the time. And this has been a problem. It's not this big highbrow conversation of the role of government, but what it is people are saying, the things I want my government to do: keep me safe in my home, protect the country's borders, don't let a bunch of people who are going to harm me, drugs that are going to harm my kids, don't let that stuff in the country. Make sure that we have a functioning economy and a functioning supply chain. Do what you can with monetary policy and with spending policy to make sure that inflation is not out of control and I can afford my groceries. This is what they want their government to do. What they see their government doing is fixated on climate change, fixated on abortion, fixated on transgender rights, fixated on all kind of things that they don't think are important, that are not on the Americans' top agenda. And so they see the government doing all kind of things they don't want the government to do, and the government completely ignoring the things that they do want the government to do. And it leads to a massive disconnect. And so, what I've always noticed is that the Democratic Party, especially, and the left movement was very smart. For like 20 or 30 years, they were engaged in what we would call incrementalism, make the changes they wanted a little step at a time to where it didn't seem like a radical change. And then all of a sudden, after 2020 and a very close election, both, the Senate was 50-50, a House down, 5 or 6 votes, and a presidential race that came down to like 5 cities. So no mandate by any means. And then all of a sudden, they just abandoned incrementalism and went for everything at once without having the kind of legislative majority that had them with 60 members of the Senate and, almost this massive amount of votes in the House, like an FDR kind of majority. And it didn't make any sense. It's like they went for too much too fast, and they're paying a price for it. They revealed the agenda that should have been probably kept quiet for another 10 years as they work their way there.
So
And it was too much.
what I'm hearing from you is that voters are resonating this election more with the Republican message. But do you think it
Or
would be
Republican issues, not necessarily message. I wouldn't give the Republican Party credit for messaging well. What I would say is the Democratic Party is messaging so badly that the Republican alternative is attractive.
Do you think that if they kind of touted these they had a string of bipartisan successes over the recent months, such as the Honoring Our Pact Act, bipartisan gun control, the CHIPS Act, do you think that that's a better message than what we're seeing now?
You know what the average American is going to say? How did that, what say, oh, that sounds great. Now, how did that lower the price of gas? How much is that going to affect the cost of milk? And what did you do to keep my grandchildren from dying of fentanyl? Oh, none of that dealt with that? Okay, thanks.
And so before I let you go, Robert, I do have to ask you, let's say midterms were held today. Who do you think would control the House and the Senate? Republicans or Democrats? I think I know your answer based on our conversation, but tell me anyway.
If it was today, I would say the Republicans win the House and the Democrats win the Senate. If it was in 2 weeks, I'd say the Republicans will win the House and they'll win the Senate. And if it was in 5 weeks, I can't tell you yet.
Then I think we have to have you back on as it gets closer, hopefully. Robert Cayley of the Trafalgar Group, thank you so much.
No problem. It's great to be here, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your day.